You know, normally I wouldn't discuss grand cultural piles of shite, but this one is such a glorious dumpster fire I thought, well, why not? So let's take a look at the oh-so-delicious fallout from the Netflix series Cleopatra, which aimed to make Cleopatra black, because of course they frickin' did, which culminated in the project receiving the worst ever review for anything on Rotten Tomatoes. You can imagine the criticism against this would be rather scathing. And yes, of course, we have the usual part and parcel of the cycle by now of immediately decrying everyone and everything racist if they didn't instantaneously drop to their knees and worship this garbage as if it was made of gold. Now, the reason why this train wreck is so interesting is because of who was wielding the harshest of backlashes. See, normally these cretins would try to pervert or fairify, and yes, that is the gayest phrase I can think of and use for that particular purpose, a specifically American-made franchise. They are, unfortunately, a New World imperial power, and they export garbage. This project, however, involved doing something that always backfires whenever the Yanks try and do this, leaving their borders, and this case is no exception, seeing as they try to fairify an actual historical figure that belongs to another nation, and thus they managed to earn the eye of the entire Egyptian state. That is a level of antagonism that is borderline impressive. Hey, you gimps in the military-industrial complex in Yankee land, you don't need to use weapons to irritate foreign nations, just make piss-poor historical fiction. Seems to be a lot cheaper, and less bloody. Take note. I do love how the people will decry anyone that criticizes this garbage as racist, even though the main architect of said backlash is the Egyptian state. It's not exactly a place in the world known for harboring white nationalists, you know. Bloody hell. It's kind of ironic though, these people scream all damn day about diversity and inclusivity, and yet somehow they manage to unite white nationalists and Egyptians in order to defend Egyptian heritage. Fucking amazing timeline we live in though, isn't it? Anyway, Jada Smith, who produced this nonsense, said this: "We don't often get to see or hear stories about black queens. Wonder why. And that was really important for me, as well as for my daughter and just for my community to be able to know those stories, because there are tons of them. No, there are." Now, this pathetic Hollywood virtue signaling, this creepy techno-driven form of neocolonialism aside, I don't know if that quote is legit, if the "my community" refers to her dysfunctional family, her Hollywood clique or whatever, but there is a deeper element of sadness to this whole failing endeavor and others like it that I can't help shake. This tribal band of noisemakers, this whining about the so-called oppressive nature of Europe and its history, even though Hollywood has made pieces about them before and they didn't say anything back then, you'd almost swear the outrage is entirely political or something, but anyway, nowadays they will bitch to the high heavens about those pieces featuring a lack of representation. If our history is so horrible and oppressive, why are you losing your tiny balls trying to be featured in them? I imagine for many the response would be, well, they're trying to destroy our culture and history, and yes, there is an element of that, but here's my assessment of the situation, and mine is quite a bit darker. This phenomenon in Black America, maybe America overall, but it's more acutely noticeable in Black America. Look at the world, in the likes of Africa, Europe, and Asia. Africa is not exactly known for intellectual and philosophical sophistication when compared to the likes of Europe and Asia. They don't have these great wonders, they don't have those pieces of history. Asia and Europe, on the other hand, have vast empires, some of which have spanned the globe. All over Europe, you can see it in their remnants, administrative buildings, in cathedrals, in great halls. You walk through them, you can feel the history. It's that line from 300, in all the countless centuries yet to be, may our voices whisper to you from the ageless stones. It's that. Even as a South African, I can go to certain small towns or even vineyards and look at the buildings and know, that's Victorian, that's English, or that's Voortrekkers, that's Dutch. I'll show you guys some pictures of South Africa. Here we have Church Square in Pretoria. Here we have Durban City Hall, very tropical. Groot Constantia, which I believe is the oldest vineyard in Cape Town. Cape Town City Hall, inspired by Renaissance Italy. Parliament Building in Cape Town. And the Union Building in Pretoria. You think native Africans would build anything like this in a million years? Nope. Is there anything in Africa that can rival the Sphinx or the pyramids? Not even remotely. And yes, I know, this sort of conversation will undoubtedly piss off some fucker who'd scarcely be able to even name any African countries, and sure as hell would not be able to point them out on a map even if their lives depended on it. Hell, most of them would be lucky to even freaking point out the African continent. Africa, by comparison, is extremely primitive, where raw power is what is valued above all, and such a domain, absent of your stupid modern-day political propaganda, will be exclusively dominated by men. Women, get this through your heads, you are smaller and weaker, and never will you be seen as the leaders of men. Men will never ever respect you in that role as we would other men, because you rear the young. This has nothing to do with politics even, it's strictly biological. Forever will we look at you as something to protect, not revere as a leader, because this is how our species survives. And no amount of political indoctrination is ever going to undo that. It is in your DNA. Look at the Black American community. Less than a quarter of Black women get married. Almost 3/4 of children are born out of marriage. It is in tatters without men holding the reins of power. Matriarchal rule in that community has resulted in utterly chaotic dysfunction. And how do those mothers raise their kids? Through violence. You see videos of that dysfunction go viral. You look at the comment section, every single time the theme can be distilled down to 2 words: no father. So when you look at this whole scenario overall, you have this deluded Hollywood woman of color trying to infuse this bastardized, fairy-fied version of a historical figure of another nation to use as a symbol of this modern-day white liberal woman's feminist idea of Yas Black Queen Slay to send a message and appeal to an audience that doesn't exist. I can't think of any aspect of the story that isn't completely insane. When they pull this kind of a stunt, they look like a group of people who have no roots, no sense of who they are, no concept of greatness that suits them. They look like a foreign element in an environment where they frankly don't belong. The whole endeavor screams of a deep insecurity over who they are as a people. If you ever hear these people talk about the concept of blackness, you know they're Americanized, because here's the skinny. Europe is all white. Africa is all black. When you have this continent homogeneity, the groups are distinguished from each other through other variables, like language and culture, hence why you have French, Spanish, Dutch, English, Italian, German, or Portuguese, so on and so forth. Africa is the same. Different names and cultures, tribal identities, absence of any knowledge or ties to any of this, it gets boiled down to the most basic tribal identities: race. This concept is completely foreign to Americans, mind you. It's why their cultural exports are so toxically stupid. It's their problem. It is the manifestation of that rootless nomad looking for a home, because they don't have one. Do you think if you ask these people, prior to European intervention on the African continent, what kind of archetype would exemplify a heroic figure in their tales? I imagine most won't even understand that question, let alone have an answer for it. Because the truth of the matter is simply this. This gimmick of historical rewriting or storytelling, if I can even call it that, is trying to find this mythical woke heroine which doesn't even exist now, and it certainly won't exist in primitive patriarchal Africa. They want this excessively enlightened Western liberal female that's never had any contact with Westerners, which again doesn't exist. It's why all the stories are terrible. It's fiction without any grounding in reality or relatability. Here is something peculiar and perhaps uncomfortable to point out, but look at the cultural gravitas of, say, Black Panther. In that movie, the leadership role gets challenged through combat. For all of the advancement that technology is supposed to bring, at the end of the day, the power structure is still decided by primitive brute strength. Take a moment to process that. But I'll end it with some food for thought. There's probably some black queens out there that might make a compelling story, but here's the kicker. There is an extremely high chance they would likely be African black and not African American. Look at the top 3 of this train wreck of a project: the director, the producer, and the main actress. They're not black, they're freaking mixed. They just lead with the black. But if they took an African story and tried to pass themselves off as black, they wouldn't be trying to make the story more authentically African. Ooh, no. They would be injecting the part of them that isn't African. And there is no way they would ever get away with doing that.